pitted against the Prime Minister and whoever the leader of the Conservative Party may be, well, so be it. I think I'm ready for that right now. Thank you very much indeed. Right. Okay, we have a list of 18 people who wish to ask questions, so we'll try to rattle through as best we possibly can, beginning with Natasha Clark from LBC.
Hi, Natasha Clark from LBC. Mr Farage, you say you're the party of the workers now. Why did your party vote down Labour's workers' rights package, which would have given them far more rights? And last week, Reform was accused of what critics say is a race-baiting advert for a Scottish MSP by-election by wrongly claiming that Anna Sarwar would put the Pakistani community first. What's your response to that? Thank you.
Because to have rights, they need to have jobs. And if you bring in legislation that means fewer people will be in work, what have you done for workers' rights? And I think it's all well and good making law. I saw this in the EU as well. It's all well and good making law for companies with 5,000 employees, 25,000 employees. What about companies with 3 employees? And this is the problem. The legislation never thinks about those, despite the fact in the British economy, it's the small private businesses that employ more people than the big CBI firms or whoever else it may be. And I think the idea that you could take somebody on, recognise that it's a mistake pretty quickly, and yet they could take action against you within 24 hours of being in work, probably would lead to small employers who, by the way, are already very reluctant to take anybody on, given the hikes to national insurance, given all the other problems that they face. So we opposed it because we thought it was very, very bad for employment. Now, there's a bit of a row going on in Scotland. Everyone's having a go at us, Labour, the SNP, so maybe we're getting something right. I think what I'm able to do is to show you what Mr Sarwar actually said and how we've responded to it. Can we do that, guys?
Pakistan is represented in every mainstream political party in Scotland and across the UK. The days where South Asian communities get to lead political parties and get to lead countries is now upon us.
So it was Anna Sarwar that introduced sectarianism into Scottish politics, making it perfectly clear his priority was to a certain section of the community. All we've done is to put out the exact words spoken by him without any comment. We've said nothing, just that we will represent the people of that constituency. And the fact that they, having chosen to go down the sectarian route, choose to throw accusations back at us, says to me, Natasha, that we are winning. Thank you very much indeed. David Churchill, Daily Mail.
Thank you. Mr Farage, regardless of whether you can afford to lift the 2-child benefit cap, Kemi Badenoch was on the airwaves at the weekend saying that just as a matter of principle, if people can't afford to have lots of children, then they just shouldn't have them, and it's unfair to expect taxpayers to subsidise other people having large families they can't afford. Why do you think she's wrong about that? You obviously clearly do think she's wrong about that.
We size low earners in lots and lots of different ways already. I understand the big point you can make, but the point I'm trying to make is there are lots and lots of people, British people out there, who would like to have children but are terrified of what the cost of childcare are, terrified about how difficult this is going to be, terrified there are no workplace creches, all the things I mentioned earlier. We are trying to help young, working British people who are not on particularly big incomes to have more children. And, you know, Kemi Badenoch's view might right now be the majority instinctive view, but this is part of a bigger package and policy that we are putting together to try and make the family a more important element in British life. Thank you. Lucy White from Bloomberg. No? Donna Runner?
Yep.
Yes, oh, sorry.
Hi, Lucy White from Bloomberg. On that same subject, actually, you've talked about the importance of family, but one of the main reasons that people are choosing to have smaller families or no children at all these days is because housing costs are so high. And tinkering around the edges of tax policy is probably not going to do very much to that. So can you set out what you would do to make housing more affordable?
Quite right, Lucy, I accept that point. I did say that what I discussed so far today was not a silver bullet. It didn't solve all the problem. I talked about childcare. Housing, of course, also a massive problem. You know, if you increase the population by 10 million through immigration, then you need to build a new house every 2 minutes in this country just to keep up. Even if Angela Rayner's targets are met for house building, they won't even cover anything like what legal net migration, let alone illegal, will be during the 5-year, if it is that, Labour term. Housing is a massive, massive problem. Social housing is also a massive problem. I was horrified going around the country in the run-up to May the 1st, horrified to see county councils where going to the top of the list for social housing priorities were people who'd crossed the English Channel illegally and were given indefinite leave to remain. Absolutely horrified to see that. But that is what is going on out there. All right, we need to build houses. We need to build genuinely affordable houses. It does sometimes look to me that housing developments are 4-bed, detached, 2-bathroom, nice garage and garden houses, and not enough houses that are genuinely affordable. It is a massive problem, but it is one that government has made significantly worse. Amy Gibbons from The Telegraph, please.
Hello, thanks very much. Nigel, you talked about making marriage more important and encouraging people to stay married for longer. So just to be clear, would you like to see the marriage rate come up and the divorce rate come down?
Oh, I'm not the Pope, you know. In an ideal world, look, of course, there are valid, legitimate reasons for divorce. I've got lots of experience of this. We can talk about it later. In an ideal world, for the benefit of children growing up, I repeat the point, there is lots and lots of evidence that suggests that children growing up to maturity into adulthood in a stable family background, which doesn't have to be marriage, I accept, but more often than not is, do better in life. Don't we deserve to try to help create a framework in which young people can grow up and lead fulfilling lives? And all right, you may say, I'm aiming very high, but isn't that what we're in politics for? Isn't that the point of the whole thing? Thank you. Archie Mitchell from The Independent.
In the run-up to the local elections, reform activists set up a stall depicting Angela Rayner, Bridget Phillipson and Rachel Reeves as cows said to be sent to the abattoir. Is it misogynistic to depict female cabinet ministers as cows, and is it appropriate to suggest that they're going to be sent to the abattoir, given MPs have been killed in recent years?
Well, you've struck me there completely out of the blue. All sorts of appalling things get said and done by people fighting in elections at local and national election, and we get it done to us, and if one or two of our people do it to them, maybe they think it's funny. It probably isn't very funny. I can't pretend we're perfect, but what I can tell you is that one of the ways in which we have professionalised this party is to put people through a vetting process, and I think we've come up with a slate of elected councillors and mayors and a new MP that we can genuinely be very proud of. And if there is the odd lapse in taste, then I regret it, but it's kind of called politics. Thank you, Archie. Kitty Donaldson from iNews.
Thank you. How much do you think it'll cost to move migrants from hotels into a private accommodation? And if you don't save as much as you want to, are you happy with them to live in tents? And if I may, will you commit to the triple lock for pensioners in the next Parliament? OK, the triple lock for pensioners is not something we've addressed as yet. We will between now and the next election. We are, as you can see, building out our policy platform. The migrant costs, the illegal migrant costs by the end of our 5-year term will be zero. They won't be coming. They won't be coming. And we have a model for this. It's called Australia. Australia had the boats arriving, coming from Indonesia. They didn't know what to do.
Then Tony Abbott, as Prime Minister, tried a few different methods. In the end, he towed them back to Indonesia. There was outrage. Outrage. The UN, the EU, the British Foreign Office. What a dreadful human being Tony Abbott is. But guess what happened? Within 2 weeks, people didn't pay the traffickers because they knew they wouldn't be allowed to stay. There is a deeper debate here, by the way. Even though the hotels are awful and very visible, if you talk to Sarah afterwards, she'll tell you that actually the houses of multiple occupancy in residential streets in some ways are even worse in terms of not just cost, but the huge social problems they bring. So look, the answer is very simple. One of our senior party members has suggested tents. I'm much more hardline than her. They won't be allowed to stay. Thank you. Let's move on to John Walker from The Express, please.
Thank you. Mr. Farage, could you expand a little on what you were saying about tax? Is one of the announcements that I don't think we were expecting. I think you mentioned a figure of £20,000. What does that mean? Are you talking about increasing the threshold, or how would that work?
Yes. Simply, the threshold has been frozen for years. You know, it was done by Jeremy Hunt. It's called fiscal drag, but that's very boring, I know. It's being maintained under Labour, and it's dragging more and more people into tax, including pensioners. There are now another 1 million pensioners will be dragged into the tax system as a result of the fact they've got the old age pension, a small income from their private pension, and the threshold has been frozen. It's also interesting to note, if we go up the scale slightly, that from the late 1980s, right through until about 5 years ago, the number of people who paid top rate tax, i.e. what was 40% plus all through the major Blair years, was about 1.5 million. About 1.5 million people paid 40p or more. By the end of next year, it'll be 8 million. So what we're seeing at all levels are more and more people being dragged into tax, into higher taxes. We have to find a way. There has to be a carrot and stick approach to the sheer number of people going onto a range of full-time benefits as opposed to working. And some of it, of course, are people who are choosing that as a lifestyle option. Equally, I've met many on my doorsteps who want to go back to work, but they're trapped by the sort of 16-hour rule, that if they get a job for more than 16 hours, they lose all of their benefits. And because of a tax system, they're worse off working than they are staying on benefits. That is what we're trying to address. You know, I do accept that the 20,000 level, where the threshold would be raised to, is our greatest ambition, but I think it's something that we simply have to do. Thank you. Rachel Cunliffe from The New Statesman.
Thank you. You talk about councils, and you've got representatives from the councils that Reform are now leading on stage. For the most part, it isn't waste or DEI that's putting council budgets under strain. It's adult and child social care, which accounts for 2/3 of council budgets and is only set to get more expensive. You haven't mentioned social care yet today. I wondered if you could say something about what Reform plans are to pay for that.
Rachel, I toured the country relentlessly for 5 weeks. I visited all of these areas that we stood in. I was photographed and shook hands with well over 1,000 of our candidates, and I did so many local media interviews, it's almost not true. And of course, what I said is we can't wave a magic wand. You know, we accept that central government funding has gone down. We accept adult social care, SEND. All of these issues are massive, and it's not easy. We accept all of that. What we have said, though, is we will, where we can, and we're finding it already, cut unnecessary spending. But also what we've said is we will examine which service providers have been signed up to by county councils or unitaries, what the relationship is with those firms, to some who may well be working in councils, and we will try to seek a more business-like arrangement in terms of how we provide those services. So I fully accept that the job, the weight of responsibility on the shoulders of these men and women on stage is not an easy thing, but we think we can do better. And I tell you what, we're certainly going to try. Thank you. We're moving through. Carl Dinnan, ITV.
Thanks very much, Nigel. You were certainly right about one thing in your speech. We do want to know how you're going to pay for the policies that you've announced today. You've mentioned a couple of pretty big measures that will bring in savings, but even those won't quite cover the cost of your already announced tax plans, like the 20,000 threshold. So what I'm wondering is, are you going to tell us today how you're going to pay for winter fuel allowance, for scrapping the two-child benefit cap, and for the new married couples allowance? Are you going to tell us how you paid for these measures that you've announced today, or have you got a magic money tree growing in your back garden?
All right, you started it. The cost of net zero to the taxpayer, figures produced by the Institute of Government, are estimated between 2025 and 2030 to cost £45 billion every single year. The cost of asylum seeker accommodation, be it hotels or be it houses of multiple occupancy, as I mentioned earlier, £4 billion every year. That may be a slightly low estimate because actually the overall costs of illegal immigration are much higher. DEI, as researched by Defunding Political Campaigns, estimated to cost government £7 billion every year. Quangos, just a 5% cut. And by the way, do you remember in the general election, we suggested a 5% cut? I mean, you thought, you know, what dreadful people we were. Impossible, it can't be done. And yet the government now proposing a 5% cut. Well, we're proposing a 5% cut to Quango funding, which would over a 5-year term be £65 billion. If you add all that up, you've got a pretty eye-watering number of 350 billion. And whilst that may be, I accept, you know, slightly optimistic, because it's difficult always to cut everything, I think you can see very clearly the direction that we're going in. We can't afford net zero. It's destroying the country. We can't afford DEI. It's actually preventing many talented people from succeeding. And we certainly can't afford young, undocumented males crossing the English Channel and living in 5-star hotels with 3 square meals a day and free dental and healthcare. I think that gives you a pretty good indication of where savings are going to come from. Plus whatever else we can find. And if we find it at local government level, we'll find it at national government level too. Alex Forsyth, BBC.
Mr Farage, thank you. It might not surprise you. I just want to dig into those numbers a little bit more, because some of the things you've mentioned there, like wasteful spending and net zero, you talked about at the general election.
I know.
At that point, the Institute for Fiscal Studies said your sums don't add up. This morning, one of your own activists, Tim Montgomery, has said your sums don't add up. Isn't the reality that at this point your numbers don't add up and you are saying what you think people want to hear? And on a separate issue, in the wake of the Southport attacks, you were criticised for comments you made about the information the police had released. Given what happened in Liverpool yesterday, the police did release information about the arrested man. Was that the right approach?
Well, that was the same police force. That was the same police force who were negligent at the time of the Southport attacks, utterly negligent. And what I called for was, let's know the truth. Because the vacuum that was out there on social media was being filled with all sorts of, in some cases, what turned out to be crazy conspiracy theories. No wonder there were riots. Had the truth been known, we would not have had that situation. And I was condemned by all and sundry for it, apart from by Jonathan Hall, KC, the terrorism czar, you know, who basically said, look, Nigel's right. The truth should have been told at the time of Southport. I think what we got yesterday was that Merseyside police have begun to learn some of the lessons from that, and that is a very good thing and not a bad thing. Oh, you can argue about numbers adding up. You could probably argue that at no point in the history of any form of government has anybody ever thought their numbers added up. I would point you to one thing. When Richard Tice and I launched the contract with the people in South Wales last year, we pointed out the cost of quantitative easing and the way the Bank of England was dealing with it, and we were laughed at by everybody. We said it was costing 25 to 30 billion pounds a year. We actually got the figures a few months ago for the cost of QE last year from the Bank of England. It was 36 billion. So what we're very good at, we're good at actually putting our finger on things and pointing out problems that nobody else has even thought of. And that's because we're not from the political mainstream. We're not part of that institutionalized set of thinking. We take a fresh approach to everything. I think what I've done today, what I've tried to do today, is to give you an idea of direction of policy, of priorities, of what we think is important, of what we think it's going to cost, and how we think we're going to pay for it. And I don't think anybody at this stage, with a general election some years away, could frankly do more than that. And I believe what I presented today is credible. Thank you. We've now got Caroline Hug from Politico.
I just wanted to ask, what would Reform have done at the Brexit summit if they were in charge? And like Badenoch, are you going to commit to undoing any progress in talks?
Well, I accept we start in a bad place. And I also accept that Boris Johnson and David Frost did inherit a very bad hand of cards from Theresa May. I accept all of those things. But the argument, it'll make trade easier, well, that was the argument for staying in. What the Prime Minister is doing effectively, he's rerunning the arguments that were used in the Brexit referendum. It will, for example, what he's done will make trade in agricultural produce with South Africa and the rest of the world much more difficult. What I would not have done is to have gone back to the ECJ and allowed them any jurisdiction. And what I would have done is to say, look, what you got from Frost and Johnson was you were given 4 years. 4 years for your fleets to continue to fish in British waters. That was your transition period. You're out now. And the minimum we're going to do is take back the 12-mile line with further thought about how we take back for Scotland and elsewhere the 200-mile European Economic Zone. There are a couple of things that I would have done. Fraser Nelson from The Times, but also I think is doing a documentary on reform. Is that right, Fraser?
It is, yeah. You were introduced to us today as the next Prime Minister. Do you think it's true? Could you really go from having a handful of MPs and no shadow cabinet to number 10 at the next election?
History would say the answer to your question is no. Circumstances would suggest the answer is yes. Something extraordinary is happening. The collapse of confidence in two political parties that have pretty much merged. Both wanting to go down the net zero route regardless of consequences and costs, both running effectively open border policies, both incapable of dealing with illegal immigration, both who have no comprehension of the 5.5 million men and women out there running their own businesses or acting as sole traders. Both, despite what they say, overseeing an ever-rising tax burden. Both, started by Jeremy Hunt, remember, both contributing to an exodus, not just of non-doms and the super rich, but of the 30-something entrepreneurs who are now being tempted away by Lisbon, by Athens, by Milano, by Dubai. And yeah, I think the public have frankly had enough of both of them. I think the Westminster priorities have been hopelessly out of kilter with where most of the country really is. And I think, what I've said today is that actually this Prime Minister is maybe even more out of touch than some of the previous Conservative Prime Ministers. They want something different. They want a politics that is unafraid to stand up and say what it is. They want a kind of leadership that is based not on following short-term trends, not on being afraid of being criticised, but has actually got some sort of conviction and I hope some sort of courage. And I think I'm surrounded by people who've got courage. I'm surrounded by people who put their heads up over the parapet and decided something needs to change. But also, there is an optimism about what we do. Our voters aren't just sticking two fingers up to the establishment. They've got good reason to. They're not. Our voters, when you meet them, are wildly enthusiastic. They think we are going to turn this country around. Thank you. Right, I've got a couple more to go through. Chris Smith from The Times.
Thank you. Just back on spending, your argument seems to be that you've got some areas you want to look at. You don't have the details yet, but you'll get to that by the next election and basically asking voters to to trust you on that. But as you say, you're a party of government now. How do you hope that approach is going to work out any better for you than it did for Liz Truss? And on a related point, can I ask you a question which I asked Keir Starmer at Labour's manifesto launched last year when he was saying he wouldn't need to put up taxes at all, and which he didn't answer. Say you don't find these savings that you hope for. What is your instinct about a plan B? Is it to junk some of these costly spending commitments you've made today? Is it to put up taxes, or is it more borrowing?
With respect, we are some way out from this yet, but we will be having this conversation, I'm sure. Liz Truss's dramatic failure was not to propose any cuts in spending. It's all well and good cutting taxes, but she had to make the corresponding cuts with Kwarteng in spending. Didn't do it. Just tried to say, well, we won't increase by the rate of inflation over the course of the next few years. That was a fatal error. As for Starmer's promises, look, do you know what? I just think there are two types of people in politics. Those who want to be something, those who want to do something. For him, it was about becoming Prime Minister. For me, it's about turning this country around. Simple as that. James Hill, Spectator.
Thanks, Nigel. You went through various members of the Cabinet today. You dismissed Johnny Reynolds, Rachel Reeves...
Why is nobody talking about...
who you didn't address, Angela Rayner.
I see nobody...
Some speculation in recent days that she might fare better against
and
reform at
only
the next
dip into
election.
the news.
You faced off against her at last year's general election on the BBC. Just tell us your thoughts on her and whether she stands a better chance than Keir Starmer come the next election.
Well, at least she's real. I mean, none of the rest are. I don't think she's lied on her CV. Not sure she's got a CV. I mean, she is who she is. What we have learned, I think, over the course of the last week is that her ideas on tax, on saving, are even more radical than those of Rachel Reeves. And she tends on economics, certainly economics, to be way, way out on the left. And number one, that is not a majority opinion by any means in the country, nor will it become one. And it's a very busy space. You've got the Lib Dems heading into some of that territory, the Greens very firmly in that territory, and indeed, from what I can see of the Gaza independents, they're pretty much of that view as well. So, look, maybe she'll become the leader. I don't know. Are we worried about it? Not at all. Two more questions. Adam Cherry, GB News.
Just on the detail of what you're announcing today, are you scrapping the benefit cap entirely, or are you introducing a new cap of 3 or 4 children? And then on the shared family tax allowance, are you putting a figure on that today, or is it just sort of in principle?
Yeah, it'll be up to a £5,000 transferable allowance, all right, which would help, say one of the parents wanted to spend a bit more time at home in the first 18 months, 2 years of a child's life. Those allowances could be transferred. It would give people more options and greater flexibility. We're not putting a cap on the number of children. I want to re-emphasise this is not for people to arrive in Britain from overseas and have lots and lots of kids. It's designed to help hard-working, though slightly low-paid British workers. Final question, last and by no means least, Kieran Stacey, Guardian.
Thank you very much. You've spoken today about some of your policies that are designed to be family focused. Can I ask about another similar issue? I've heard you talk about your desire to open up a debate on stricter restrictions on abortion. Can I ask your view? Do you think that the abortion time limit should come down? Do you think there should be larger buffer zones around abortion clinics? What do you think about this issue?
All of these things, like assisted dying debate, which is going to come back again on June the 13th, I think issues around this, issues around abortion, I genuinely believe these are issues of personal conscience. I am pro-choice, but I think it's ludicrous, utterly ludicrous, that we can allow abortion up to 24 weeks, and yet if a child is born prematurely at 22 weeks, your local hospital will move heaven and earth and probably succeed in that child surviving and going on and living a normal life. So I believe there is an inconsistency in the law. I believe it's totally out of date, but I do believe, I wouldn't particularly want anyone around me to agree with that or disagree with that. I'd leave it up to them. I think our current situation on this is irrational. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
So the conclusion of that press conference there by the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage. In his statements, he said that the focus really was to take the fight, it seemed to say, to Labour rather than the Conservatives. He actually said that the Conservative Party was now irrelevant, and so he was paying attention to the policies of the Labour Party and stating that Reform was really the party of working people. He mentioned a policy pledge there from Reform UK, which would be to remove the two-child benefit cap. Of course, there are still conversations within the Labour Party itself. This has been really a controversial policy for the Labour Party, but conversations still ongoing as to whether Labour would do the same. He also announced that Reform would back a shared family tax allowance for married couples. And crucial on that point about the two-child benefit cap, he says removing it would help lower paid workers, make it easier for them to have children. He said this was not because Reform UK was in support of the benefits culture, but this was for people, British working people, hard-working people, not for people coming in from abroad. So a range of policies there outlined by the leader of Reform UK. Let's bring in our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman. And Henry, you were listening into that press conference. What were the key takeaways for you?
Well, I think this is Nigel Farage as optimistic about his political fortunes as we've perhaps ever seen him. Yes, he leads a party that has only 5 MPs out of 650, but we saw at the local elections earlier this month that Reform UK are doing extremely well, certainly at this early stage of the political cycle. And this was Nigel Farage almost claiming victory in terms of usurping the Conservative Party and now turning his sights on the Labour Party. That was really the focus of his speech today. He tried to outflank Labour to the left, particularly on 2 sensitive areas of welfare policy, both the winter fuel allowance and the two-child benefit cap. I guess the question is whether this is a bit of hubris from the Reform UK leader about whether actually these local election votes were a protest